When Mary was very little, she loved fairy tales. At first, her mother read books to her, but then she learned to read on her own, and every time, Mary believed that a real fairy tale story would happen in her life. But it turned out that dreams do come true. Only her fairy tale turned out to be scary. At first, her mother died. It was so unfair that it just didn't fit into Mary's little mind. How is it possible? Is her mother not around anymore? Everyone has one, but she doesn't. Even the abusive Charles, even the imaginary Lauren, even though her mother was neither young nor beautiful. Mary did not believe at that moment that her mother would not come into the house anymore, that she would not prepare a delicious breakfast, that they would not cuddle up together in bed and fight with pillows. It seemed to her that everyone around her was pretending and hiding a fact that she understood perfectly well. Her mother did not die. An evil witch put a spell on her, and she slept a fairy tale sleep. When she asked her father to wake her mother up, he cried. And a year later, another woman appeared in the house. "This is Aunt Emily," her dad explained to Mary. "She'll be your new mommy." "No," Mary replied, backing away from the smirking aunt. "I don't need a new mommy." "Of course you do." Her dad grabbed his daughter and pulled her close. "Amo knows how to treat kids. She's a teacher. I'm sure they'll become friends." "No, I don't want to," Marie declared. "Let her go." And then her dad, for the first time in her life, slapped her. It didn't hurt much, but it was very painful. Marie spent the whole day in her room crying. And when hunger brought her out of hiding, Aunt Amone told her that she would only get food if she called her mom. That night, the crying girl went to bed hungry. Contrary to expectations, her father did not throw the wicked witch out, and soon she became the absolute mistress of the house. So everything followed the script of a fairy tale about the stepmother and the poor stepdaughter. Even when her father fell ill, he struggled for a long time. The disease consumed him from within. And for the 12-year-old girl, it was terrifying to see him like that, emaciated, pale, with a drip needle sticking out of his hand. "I'm about to die," his father once said, very simply and ordinarily. "I thought I would get over it, that I could live without her, but it doesn't work. Forgive me, Amélie. I seem to be a one-time lover. Keep living. I just beg you not to abandon Mary." "Never, my dear. Of course I won't leave you." The new wife had him by the hand, but Mary, for some reason, knew it was a lie. Then her father died, and it turned out that he left all his money to his daughter. Aunt Amélie became her guardian. At first, she approached the girl's resources with caution. Then, feeling unpunished, she became more and more abusive. Not even half a year passed when the widow found a new husband, a young and impudent man with the figure of a fitness trainer. Mare increasingly locked herself in her room so as not to hear or see them, or she went for long walks around the city. She studied well. There were no questions for her teachers. She dressed carefully, but she never traveled with her class. Most people thought she was just very introverted, and no one asked her questions. However, the reason was another. Mare had no money, not even for her personal expenses, much less to ask her stepmother for a considerable sum for a trip. Mare endured it, and waited for the time to come to claim her inheritance and move away from the house that was no longer a home. The situation worsened when her stepmother decided that the young husband was paying too much attention to his 12-year-old stepdaughter. She kept a constant eye on them and made scandals. Once, unable to contain herself, she attacked Mare with a hot frying pan. The girl managed to protect herself with her hand, but a burn mark remained. Her already difficult life turned into a nightmare. Mare never forgot the day when her crazed stepmother grabbed her and swung her over the balcony, threatening to throw her off the 7th floor. Staring into the maddened eyes of the insane woman, Mare screamed and screamed until the stepmother's husband ran out to them and held her down tightly. Mare struggled to breathe, her hands clutching her throat. But for some reason, she only made muffled sounds. She didn't yet know then that she had lost her voice completely. At night, huddled under the covers, Mare heard snatches of a conversation through the wall. "What have you done?" The husband screamed at Mare. "Now she will certainly go to the police and tell everything. You got yourself into trouble. Goodbye to the easy life with the orphan girl's money. Hello to the consequences. How stupid do you have to be to screw up like this?" "She won't go," the stepmother suddenly declared. "I'll sort it out." "What else do you have in mind?" the husband shouted, clearly frightened. "Note that I'm not signing any of this." "I know because you're a coward," the stepmother replied coldly. "I'll take her far away to a village to visit my grandmother, as if she were recuperating in the open air. There are remote places there, all kinds of people meet. Besides, there is a deep river nearby, anything can happen." "I didn't hear that," the man said. Mare heard no more. A ringing filled her ears. Her heart was beating like crazy. What should she do? Will the police come in her current state, without a voice? Yes, she could write on a piece of paper, but her aunt would say that they were lies and that there were no witnesses. The girl couldn't invent anything serious enough to incriminate the honest woman. The solution had to be found. In the morning, the stepmother ordered Mare to get ready. Her voice hadn't returned, so she couldn't call for help. Aunt Amole herself packed her things into a large bag and stuffed documents into it. With each passing minute, Mara felt more frightened. She decided to escape on the road. The aunt took her out of the city, and they traveled for a long time through completely unknown places. Ma had never been in that area before. In addition, there were few settlements on their way, and the road turned into a path. Forests followed one another in fields. According to her calculations, about 5 hours had already passed. The road had turned into a path long before and finally entered a dense forest. The trees closed in on both sides of the road, leaning as if they were watching the intruder who disturbed their peace. Mare felt the urge to go to the bathroom very much, and she tried to communicate this to her stepmother by moaning. At first, the stepmother paid no attention to her, but then, realizing that the girl could ruin her seats, she stopped and forcefully pulled Amar out of the car. "Well, what are you waiting for?" "There's no one here," she pointed at the girl directly on the road. But Murray, shaking his head, pointed towards the dense bushes. "Oh, you're so shy," the stepmother said mockingly. "Okay, get into the bushes if you want me to drive you all the way through your ass." "I'll stay in the car." "Come on, quick!" Murray, making sure that the stepmother had sat down directly on the road, stepped into the bushes. "This is my chance," he thought madly, and he began to run through the bushes and trees like a frightened deer. "Oh, you're a bitch!" cried the stepmother, chasing her. But time was running out, and Mary had gained a slight advantage. Besides, fear gave her speed, and she ran. The stepmother's cry grew weaker and weaker, falling behind, and then for some reason her strength left her, and Mare fell into the soft moss. This was her salvation. For some strange reason, she ran straight into the middle of a swamp, without falling into the peat, jumping from island to island, firmly holding on to the surface. An accidentally knocked over log sank into the swamp, and when the stepmother chased Mare to that place, the swamp closed over her with an audible splash. The stepmother stared at the chain of footprints left by the fugitive, then looked to where something had disappeared under the water. "Don't drown. That's your way, you vile creature." She spat in the grass, frowning maliciously, and headed back to the car. Mary didn't hear her words. She lost consciousness. She woke up feeling that something was wet beneath her. She opened her eyes and almost screamed in horror. The mound she was lying on was slowly sinking into the swamp. Mary lay still, afraid to move and sink further. In school, she had been taught to hold onto a branch or lean on a stick, but here there was neither. "It seems I am going to die in this place," Mary thought with some relief. So be it, instead of falling into the hands of that evil aunt. However, Mary didn't want to give up, so she tried to move to the side, which proved to be useless as she immediately sank into the swamp. Ma groaned as she thrashed around and smeared her hands with the sticky mud. Suddenly she saw a shadow on the other side of the swamp advancing towards her, coming closer. 2 yellow eyes flashed. A wolf flashed through the girl's mind. It frightened her so much that she stopped waving her hands and prepared to sink. But the furry shadow moved determinedly and breathed loudly as it came closer. Maybe it was a dog after all. Mary wondered doubtfully. She had no time to think, so she clung to the animal's fur. Her unexpected savior squealed and pulled her up, pulling her out of the swamp. She felt the mud release her grip and surround the rescuer. They were both panting with effort, but finally their legs were free. Mare released her grip and lay still, catching her breath. However, her savior, whoever he was, growled and grabbed her hand. Not too hard, but enough for Mare to feel his fangs. Mare sensed what was expected of her and followed the animal, trying to repeat the exact path. Sometimes the animal turned around as if checking whether it was still following her. The journey through the swamp seemed eternal, and Mara could hardly believe it when she finally managed to grab onto a branch and pull her body out to a dry place. She lay on her back and closed her eyes. Apparently, she lost consciousness again because she opened them only when she felt a rough tongue on her cheeks. The animal was nearby and breathing loudly. Still, it looked very much like a wolf, although Mare had only seen them in the zoo or in pictures. "Now it's going to devour me," the girl thought indifferently. Sadness overcame her so much that she had no desire to live or move at all. Still, she raised her head and looked into the animal's eyes. At some point she had heard or read that animals cannot stand the direct gaze of humans. Apparently, it had not read about that fact, as it looked directly at her and even seemed to be scolding her. Then it turned around and walked into the thick forest, looking back. At first, Mary didn't understand what she wanted and was even glad. Maybe it's full or doesn't look appetizing, so there's a chance that the animal will leave and she can get up and walk. "Where will I go?" she asked herself. "I don't even know which way the path is. All that remains is to get completely lost and then meet someone less scrupulous who will blindly devour me." Meanwhile, the animal, noticing that the girl was standing still, growled irritably and walked back. Mary shuddered. When he grabbed the edge of her wet jacket and dragged her along, she felt, showing that she understood. "What difference does it make?" she thought. "I'll follow him. Maybe he really knows the way to people and isn't trying to lead me into his lair to turn me into preserves." Her doubts were dispelled when, after half an hour of constantly walking through bushes, they came out into a clearing in the middle of the forest. There was a hut that was missing only the shady branches on the roof, Mare thought. However, her love for fairy tales made itself felt even in critical situations. The animal came closer to the dwelling and made a guttural noise reminiscent of a growl. There was a minute of silence, and Mare wondered if she should run away. "You're the Eshi," she heard from the hut. "Are you hungry, vagabond?" The door opened, and on the threshold stood a huge man, at least that's what it seemed to the terrified girl, in a camouflage suit. The girl's thoughts flew through her mind like frightened squirrels, but now she was afraid to even take a step. Forester or hunter, Mare wondered, but now she was afraid to even take a step. What was the point anyway? Either way, one or the other would get to her. "Who have you brought?" the man asked in surprise, looking at Mare, shivering with cold and fear. "You pulled her out of the swamp, didn't you?" The Eshi roared in the affirmative and groaned as if to say, "I'm frozen too, don't you see? Who are you?" the man asked, towering over Mare. He really was nearly 2 meters tall, so she could only look up at him by raising her head. Mare groaned, pointing to her mouth and shaking her head. "You're mute too," the man exclaimed in surprise. "Where did you fall into my head from?" Mare began to cry. After all, she had had more than enough shocks today. "Don't make the humidity worse, you're already all wet," the man growled. "Go into the hut. My shirt is on the bench. Take off your wet clothes and put on something dry. In the meantime, I'll deal with this hairy Timorobets." Murray, shivering, entered the hut. Inside it was warm and smelled of herbs. He took off his wet clothes, found a warm shirt and put it on, buttoning it up to the top. He stood on the bench with his bare feet and closed the door, while the man gathered up the soaked clothes and carried them outside. He gave him one more instruction before doing so. "Take the warm boots from the stove, and don't shiver so much, not like the little ones." The cabin had a small stove that provided enough heat. Murray, looking into it, found the boots and put them on, feeling the relief of the heat. As she looked out the window, she saw the man drying the wool of the animal that had saved her with a cloth. Then he threw something into a bowl for her. The girl hoped it wasn't some stew made from another lost girl. Surprisingly, after she warmed herself up, she stopped being afraid. Apparently, she had already experienced enough fear for today. What else could happen? The man would turn out to be a maniac or a rapist. Well, she would find out when the time came. But for now, she was hungry. After some thought, Mari walked over to the table and saw a newspaper with a crossword puzzle and a pencil next to it. It seemed that the local hermit had some connection to the outside world, as he was interested in the news. But what made Mare most happy was the pencil. In the margin of the paper he wrote, "My name is Mare. I lost my voice because of my stepmother who tried to kill me." Then he added, "I am very hungry." Taking the paper, Mare went out into the yard. Both man and animal turned around at the creak of the door. "Well, what have you got there?" Man looked at the paper, read the scribbles, and whistled in amazement. "Leslie, look, there's a real thriller here. Aren't you making this up?" This referred to Mara. She shook her head. "Well, Leslie, are we to believe it?" The man turned to the creature. He made a short sound, as if confirming. "Yes, you got the worst of it," the man growled, examining the girl. She lowered her head, aware that she looked like a scarecrow. A giant shirt, felt boots that didn't fit her. "Well, first we have to feed you. Go to the sauna or something like in the fairy tales." The man smiled. As if remembering something, he added, "So, you're Mary?" The girl nodded. "You already know Leslie," the man continued. At the sound of her name, the beast roared. "And it didn't scare you?" the man continued. "You probably thought it was a wolf." Mary nodded again. "It's a wolf," the man snorted. "I broke it out of the trap when it was just a puppy, and now we live like two peas in a pod. My name is Kevin. I guess I'm the gamekeeper around here." Mary nodded. "Well, consider that we've introduced ourselves." Kevin added food to Lucille's plate and nodded to Mary. "Come on, I'll feed you with what heaven has provided. The broth should still be hot." The excited little girl followed him into the cabin. After rummaging around by the stove, Kevin pulled out a pot, poured the stew into 2 large plates, placed a spoon and a couple of slices of bread on top. "Eat," the mooring man said, pointing to the plate. "Don't worry, it's rabbit meat. We don't eat girls, they give me ulcers." And he laughed, obviously pleased with his own joke. Mary, hesitant, smiled too and grabbed the spoon. The stew turned out to be incredibly tasty, or maybe she was so hungry and scared that she would have eaten a whole pot right then. As she ate the stew with bread, she furtively looked at Kevin's face. He's not as old as she thought. He's not an old man, just the beard adds age to him. Maybe he's the same age as Dad. At the thought of her father, tears filled her eyes, and she began to sob. "Hey, don't cry here." The owner of the cabin raised his voice. "I can't stand all this women's nonsense." Frightened by his disapproval, Mari went back to eating in silence. Her tears dried on their own. What kind of monster would lay a hand on a child? Kevin mused. And why didn't your dad intervene? Mar looked up at him and sighed. Then she shook her head and crossed her arms over her chest. What? No mom or dad? The ranger was horrified. Oh, poor you. But you don't have to fear me, I promise I won't hurt you. I have a daughter your age, if only. Ah, forget it. She waved her hand and started eating. Mare ate everything on her plate, wiping it with a crust of bread, and looked at Kevin with a questioning expression. What now? He understood correctly. Go wash up. The bucket is outside. There is hot water in the kettle. I'll give you everything you need, just be careful. Mare rolled up his shirt sleeve and showed the burn mark. Who did this to you? Kevin shuddered. Was it your stepmother? Mary nodded. Kevin's face darkened. He muttered something under his breath, of which Mare only understood one word. I'll fix it. Go wash up. Leslie will watch you, the ranger ordered. After receiving a jug of hot water, a towel, soap, and huge pants that Kevin had tied with an elastic band around his waist so that at least they wouldn't fall off, Mare went to wash up. Behind the house, she found a bucket and a tub of rainwater. She washed away the dirt, as well as the fears and tensions of the past few years. Lisey's head peeked out from behind the house and she thought the wolf was smiling. He approached with an independent look and lay down to protect her. Mare carefully dried herself, dressed, and sat down beside her protector. She stroked his dry hair and murmured words of gratitude and affection. Now, after eating and washing, she felt safer here than she had at home before. How are you? Finished your baths? Kevin asked from around the corner. Instead of Mary, the Leshy replied, raising his head and roaring with determination. The ranger, making sure his unwelcome guest was dressed and had even gotten her wet clothes from the pile and hung them out to dry, snorted and sat down a little further away. What should I do with you? He asked, not so much to Mare as to himself. Do you have family? The girl shook her head. That's bad, the man mused. In theory, I should return you to the city and sue your stepmother. Mary looked at him with frightened eyes. I don't have much faith in our justice system, Kevin said with a shrug. It would only make things worse. Besides, as long as they solved the case, they would send you to an orphanage. I don't advise that. And what else can we do? Mara waited with bated breath for his decision. Staying with me is also pointless, Kevin continued. It's not appropriate for a young lady to live with a grumpy old man like me. It's not good. And besides, I'm used to loneliness. Mara Tambaran's lips. It seemed to her that Kevin would say that the orphanage would be the best option for her. But, we agreed that we weren't going to raise moisture, right? The ranger frowned and the Eshi looked at her reproachfully. We said we would think of something. She clearly didn't know how to deal with an adopted daughter. Eleshi, sitting on the grass, watched her with obvious irony, watching as his friend, after sending Mare to the hut, paced around, muttering to himself and complaining under his breath. Is it like the saying a woman had no worries? She bought a pig? Kevin mused, turning to Eleshi. I can't throw her out. I have nowhere to go. There's no police to hand her over to. Where the hell is the police? Besides, who knows us? The law is a game. It's not an option for her to stay here either. And I'm not a babysitter. The only thing left, he exclaimed, making a decision, shining. I'll take her to Grandma Karen. She's a healer. Maybe she can help you get your voice back. And don't look at me like that, he shouted at Leshy, although he remained silent. I know my temper isn't the best, but at least she's a woman, formally speaking. The Eshi raised one ear and covered his nose with a paw as if he was laughing. "Aha, laugh at me." Kevin warned him with a finger. "By the way, it's your responsibility. You were the one who brought the girl from the swamp." Alicia looked at him reproachfully, as if to say that Kevin could have left her there too. "Well, stop looking at me like that." So decided to Karen. Mara sat on a bench, looking around the cabin. What interior, though? A stove, a bench, a table, a chest, a window without curtains. On the walls hung wreaths of different herbs and various tools useful for country life. It was obvious that the owner lived alone. And here I was, falling on his head. He would either throw me out right away or return me to my aunt, Mara thought sadly. These thoughts made her feel even colder, and she wrapped her shirt tighter around her. For some reason, she was no longer afraid of this wild-looking man. She felt that guys like him would never hurt anyone. That was her dad, strong, brave, and kind. Mari dropped her head onto her hands folded on the table and began to sob loudly. She didn't hear when Kevin came into the room and sat down beside her, stroking her back with his broad hand. "Don't cry, little one. Life is like that. Tears won't change anything. I was thinking about something." Mary calmed down, listening to his voice. "Do you like fairy tales?" the ranger asked her, and she thought he smiled. Mare raised her head and nodded enthusiastically. "So you know the story of Baba Yaga?" Mare opened her eyes even more, but nodded again. "I have a friend who lives nearby, in a village. Although from that village, she is the only one left. They call her Grandma Karan, not because of her age, but out of respect. She's a very powerful healer. People travel many miles to see her. Sometimes she heals for free. Sometimes she turns people away, even if they offer large sums of money. I'm sure she can help you overcome your hoarseness." Now, with the huge and strong Kevin walking by her side and the faithful Eshi lurking nearby, life no longer seemed so bleak to Marley. Besides, brambles began to appear on both sides of the road. Soon she was completely covered in mud, and Kevin, looking down at her from his height, was snickering, hiding a smile in his mustache. Still, when the forest suddenly ended and they came to a row of extremely dilapidated houses, the little girl was frightened and squeezed Kevin's broad hand tightly. "But you promised to be brave." Kevin smiled encouragingly at her, and Mary, sighing, tried to stop shaking. Grandma Karen lived in the furthest house, the one closest to the forest. It turned out to be the only house inhabited. The other owners had left, some never to return. They would have completely forgotten the village and the healer who lived there if it weren't for the healer's fame, which spread for miles around. "Grandma Karen, open your doors!" Kevin shouted, making a megaphone with his hands. Inside, Mara felt uneasy and tried to hide behind the broad frame of her savior. Meanwhile, the door creaked and the saw drool emerged into the light, or at least that's how Mari imagined it, dressed in a long skirt and a worn vest, her head covered by a scarf, despite the summer. Ma felt a chill and tried to pull her hand away, but Kevin held it firmly. "Is that you, Kevin?" the witch asked in a hoarse voice. "Yes, who else could it be?" Kevin confirmed. The lechi coughed briefly, which seemed to replace a bark. "And who do you have with you?" Grandma Karen put her hand in the form of a visor on her forehead. Amare thought the stranger saw her through her hand. Kevin found this girl in the woods." Kevin shrugged. "She can't speak. She just wrote that her stepmother abandoned her in the woods." "She's not lying," Grandma Karen said. "I can hear the lie from miles away. This girl has already had her share." "What do you want from me?" "Take her out of her aphonia," Kevin asked, placing a restraint in front of him. "She's not mute by nature. It's because of fear. Can you help her?" "Maybe I can." Karen didn't take her eyes off the pale girl. At this moment, she was imagining what would happen when Kevin went into the woods, leaving them alone with the witch. It's just hard to compete with fear. She's still afraid of me, for example. You're scared, aren't you? She asked Mary. She, after thinking for a moment, nodded. See? Grandma Karen shrugged. Nothing good will come of this. They must take the child to the city, to a good hospital. They can't take her to the city, Kevin said with a shrug. Or they'll put her in an orphanage, or worse, return her to the stepmother. And that woman could make things worse. Maybe they won't make them worse if someone in authority keeps an eye on them. You have contacts there, right? Mary felt Kevin suddenly stiffen. We're not going to talk about it, she said quietly but firmly, which made Grandma Karen stop teasing. Do you take care of the child, or should I take her back to the forest? Grandma fell silent and bit her lips. You're a fool, Kevin, but that's your business. Even I don't dare to treat her. Finally, she spoke. Fine. I'll see what can be done. Let me take care of the child. Mary trembled and Kevin sighed loudly in relief. Thank you, God bless you, he said with emotion. I brought gifts from the forest. Enjoy them. Grandma Karen's eyes laughed, but her expression remained serious. Unload the gifts into the barn, she ordered. And you, my dear, come to me. Suddenly, he addressed the little girl in a friendly manner. Come, I don't eat children, I don't have proper teeth anymore. Mare thought that the grandmother was winking at her, although from that distance she couldn't be sure. Kevin pushed her in the direction of the porch and then entered the house following the grandmother. The little girl hesitated, standing by the porch. Should she escape into the forest again? She thought fleetingly. And at that moment she felt the Ichi nudging her nose, as if it wanted her to listen to it. Ma turned around and looked at the being. It was whining, trying to wag its tail, and seemed to be smiling. She decided that was a clear sign, and after sighing deeply, she climbed the creaking stairs and opened the door. Inside, everything was interesting. She couldn't find another word to describe it right away, as her eyes darted in all directions, and there was so much to see, as the most incredible things coexisted in this house. For example, a teapot and a computer, piles of herbs on the walls, and a multitude of jars reminiscent of those he had seen in chemistry class. Seeing the amazed expression on the girl's face, Kevin and Grandma Karen laughed out loud. Look, I'm some kind of modern-day saw slime, the sorceress proudly proclaimed, looking at her laboratory. Don't look where I live in the forest. Rebecca chose her path away from the bustle, closer to ecology. Karen defended her doctoral thesis on herbs, and not just once. Kevin added, people from all over the country come to consult her and receive treatment. She also helped me recover. It was amazing. She got me on my feet, but she couldn't fix my head, Grandma Karen muttered. Kevin tried to say something, but she cut the conversation short. If you don't want to listen, then the conversation will be short. Leave the girl and go. We'll manage without you. Kevin laughed again and winked at Mary, as if to say, look at how feisty she is. And indeed, he began to gather himself together to leave. Squatting down beside the girl, he wiped away the tears that had escaped her and said, don't be afraid. Listen to Grandma Karen, she won't hurt you. The Leshy and I will come to visit you soon, you'll see. By then, you'll surely start talking. Despite everything, the girl paled when she was alone with Grandma Karen. The old woman looked at her attentively, then came over and hugged her tightly by the shoulders suddenly. I see that life has treated you badly, and you have lost faith in people. Kevin was like that too when I met him. It was here, in the forest. She came here due to similar circumstances. I was able to heal her body, but not her soul. And now, I look at you and wonder if this is your mission. Murray looked at the old woman blankly. Well, let's have tea. Fences will be useful. Do you like fences? Mary nodded involuntarily. Karen looked at her stained hands and mouth and laughed. It looks. Look, they're in the cupboard. Take the cups. Murray reached out, opened the door and exclaimed. There was a complete set of indescribable beauty made of the finest, most transparent porcelain. Take them, take them. They are for use, not for contemplation, Grandma Karen encouraged her. Still, Mare took the cups with caution, holding them with 2 fingers, afraid of damaging such a wonder. But the tea that was poured into them was 100 times better, with crushed fences. Infused, it smelled like summer, with an aroma emanating from the kettle, and with each sip, Mare found it easier to breathe, her fears and worries melting away. Mare looked up at the grandmother sitting in front of her, and the grandmother smiled at her. "How do you like tea? Magical, isn't it?" Mare nodded shyly and smiled back. "Have you heard of living water?" Grandma Karen continued. "Well, we have all the living water here, but it only helps those who are good and kind, and those who are willing to heal themselves. You're willing, aren't you?" Mary nodded again. She liked Grandma Karen very much, even though she reminded her of Baba Yaga at first. "Very well," Grandma Karen approved. "We'll finish the tea, clean the dishes, and then we'll drive the disease out of you." Mari looked cautiously. She wondered how they were going to drive the disease out of her, but she decided not to be afraid. It couldn't be worse than with her stepmother, that much she was sure of. Once they had cleared the table and washed the dishes in a large tub, they set out along a path that led through a field. Mare walked alongside her grandmother, admiring the variety of herbs and flowers. Under the approving gaze of Grandma Karen, she wove a beautiful wreath of flowers and put it on her head. Beautiful, her companion praised, and Mare felt happier. Perhaps, after all, everything would turn out all right, like in a fairy tale. Right now, she wanted to believe in that. The path led them to the river, surrounded by lilies. In the clear water to the bottom, clouds floated, and the girl stood looking at them, feeling just as light and free. Grandma Karen took off her jacket and skirt, revealing a kind of short nightgown made of simple material. She straightened up and suddenly seemed not so old. Mary timidly threw off her clothes too and touched the water with her toes. Cold. Brr. Be brave, my child, or the water will refuse to take your illness away, Grandma Karen said firmly behind her. Mary took one step, then another, and suddenly sank head first. She waved her hands, opened her mouth in a silent scream. A whisper came from her throat, a faint ah. Grandma Karen, standing a step away from her, filled her hands and threw it over the girl, muttering something to herself. Goose water carries Mary's illness away, the frightened girl seemed to hear, and then the fear suddenly left her. Her breathing calmed down and she touched the bottom under her feet. She only needed to take one step, it turns out. Try to say something, Grandma Karen demanded. Sing. Ah, the little girl managed to articulate. Her throat was not cooperating, but now she was sure that she would speak again. Well done, Grandma Karen praised. The river has accepted you and agreed to help you. Come here every day. You will see that it will get better. Mary nodded. At that moment, she did not want to get out of the water by herself and splashed a little on the bank. Here you go. Grandma Karen threw her a wreath of flowers. Offer this wreath to the river as a thank you for the healing. Mary caressed the flowers and carefully let the current carry the gift in the direction of the current. The river took the gift and carried it away, along with the clouds. The little girl followed him with her eyes and smiled. She felt so good at that moment, and the world was shining with new colors, far from being so dark and cruel. On the shore, however, she realized that her skin was covered with small bumps, and she trembled a little as the caring grandmother wrapped her in a large, fluffy towel. The return trip along the same path was much more cheerful. Mare ran ahead, pulling up weeds and behaving like a playful puppy. Grandma Karen smiled as she looked at her and looked younger all of a sudden. When they reached the cabin, Mare suddenly felt hungry. She looked at Grandma, who was quietly reading in bed. Mare muttered, trying to attract attention. However, Grandma was either deaf or so absorbed in reading that she didn't turn her head. Mare muttered again, patted her stomach, and let out another groan. "Don't babble, speak with words," Grandma Karen replied without raising her head. Mary felt annoyed deep inside. How to speak with words? She doesn't know how to do it. "Then it doesn't take much," Grandma reacted quietly, noticing her confusion. Mary tried hard. Sounds bubbled in her throat, but refused to come out. She imagined them as billiard balls. She just had to hit each one with an invisible stick and make them come out of her throat. Mentally, she took 3 balls and pushed them in. "I Pepe can," she managed to say unexpectedly. Grandma Karen stopped reading, lowered her legs, and stroked Marley's head. "Very good," she praised. "Everything will turn out well if you try hard. Now let's eat. Grab a bowl and go out to the backyard. I have chickens there, collect eggs, and we'll fry them with bacon. What a treat." Mary, who had not yet fully recovered from her surprise, headed out to the yard. There indeed, colorful chickens and a brightly colored rooster roamed about. Under her disapproving grunt, the girl collected 5 eggs and returned triumphantly to the house. "That's it." "Very good," Grandma smiled, and soon the cottage was filled with the delicious aroma of fried bacon. The egg turned out to be incredibly tasty. Mary picked up the remains with the crust and curled up like a satisfied kitten. However, Grandma Karen, for some reason, did not share her wonderful mood. She seemed to be listening to something inside herself. Then she walked over to the door, opened it, and barely had time to step aside. The forest spirit entered the house. The wolf was whimpering, running around the cabin, looking towards the door, as if calling for someone, and Mary noticed with horror the blood on his fur. "Something happened to Kevin," Grandma screamed. "He must have run into poachers. Stay here, I'll call help. Don't move from here." However, Murray could no longer hear Grandma's screams behind him. Following the wolf that ran out of the house, she ran down the same path Kevin had led her here. The wolf looked back as he went, as if checking to see if she was following him. The girl ran, her heart beating so hard it was about to burst out of her chest. The wolf stepped out into a clearing and howled. Mary shuddered at the sight of a man lying in the grass. She lunged at him, crouched down, and began shaking him, trying to turn him over. For a second, it seemed to her that Kevin wasn't breathing. His camouflage pants were soaked with blood. It got dirty, but she kept shaking him, hoping he was still alive. The wolf whimpered beside his friend, nuzzling him. And when Mara finally gave up trying to revive Kevin, she let out a hoarse cry. "Dad." And after the first miracle, a second one happened. Kevin groaned and turned around, staring at the little girl in amazement. "Mary, is that you?" "Where did you come from?" he said with difficulty. "Dad." Mary continued to cry as she looked at the bloody grass. Kevin tried to get up, but couldn't, and frowned. "They caught us, damn it." The local poachers had been threatening him for a long time. "Well, here you go. I got shot with buckshot in both legs." Kevin tried to move his legs but couldn't do it. "Mary, I have a pocket knife in my backpack. Try to cut the pants off and bandage them." The girl pulled herself together, her tears drying on their own. Kevin helped her open the pocket knife, and Mary got to work. The tough fabric didn't give easily, but she managed it. When she saw what they had done to Kevin's legs below the knees, she let out a gasp. She looked up at him, in whose eyes she could read the gravity of the situation. "Don't let yourself be overwhelmed, child. Rebecca has overcome worse." He encouraged her, either her or himself. The girl flinched at that term. Kevin did not allow her to cry again. "Cut long pieces of cloth and bandage them as tightly as you can," he urged. "I'm going to try to crawl. These woods are not only home to Leshy, but other creatures as well, and the bipedal ones are far more dangerous." Following Kevin's advice, Mara bandaged her legs as tightly as she could. The bleeding stopped, and they both sighed in relief. With Mary's help, Kevin rolled onto his stomach and began to crawl. He did it slowly, but he did it. When he got tired, they would pause, and Mary would wipe the sweat from his forehead. The suckling pig. She fondled Kevin's pale face with her long tongue and moaned. "We'll get there, I know it," Kevin whispered as he continued to crawl doggedly. Hours seemed to pass, though Murray didn't know exactly how many. Time lost all meaning, and then Kevin went limp and unconscious. Mary stood up and ran frantically across the clearing, then a rush of emotion erupted from her throat and echoed throughout the forest. "Ah!" she screamed and marveled, and the miracle happened again. The forest echoed with the cracking of branches. A tall woman emerged into the clearing and rushed over to Kevin, sat down beside him, and quickly opened a first aid kit. Then a tall, grey-haired man came out, dressed in a camouflage suit similar to Kevin's. "Brian, we need to get him home as soon as possible," the woman ordered. Looking at Murray, she asked, "Run home. We need hot water. Lots of it. Do you remember the way?" Right next door, Leshy appeared and Mare ran after him, confident that she had seen the giant lift Kevin into his arms. Grandma Karen ran out of the ranger's station to meet her. How this strange old woman arrived here, Mare was surprised. However, she saw an all-terrain vehicle behind the house. Does this strange old woman know how to drive too? "Help!" Grandma ordered, looking out into the woods. They had time to boil water and prepare bandages and cotton when the door opened and the huge Brian, bending almost in half, carried Kevin into the house. The woman entered behind him, and only then could Mara see how beautiful she was. A fairy tale beauty. They settled Kevin on the table, and both women began to look after him. "Come on, stay out of the way." Brian's broad hand rested on the girl's shoulder. Obeying him, she went out into the yard, and only there did she give free rein to her tears. She cried, uttering incoherent syllables, while Brian silently caressed her and said, "Don't worry about Kevin, daughter. He's come out of worse situations. She saved my life twice, and not just mine. So now it's my turn to return the favor. We'll catch and punish those bandits. Don't worry about that." Mari gradually calmed down, her thin shoulders shaking less and less. Grandma Karen came out of the house, hugged her, and said tenderly, "You're wrong, Brian. It wasn't us. It was her who saved his life today. And I told Kevin that he would have a daughter, so it turned out to be true." "Has she woke up?" Brian asked. Mary felt that they were hiding something. "Do you want to ask about Rebecca?" Grandma Karen said mockingly. "She doesn't leave him. She watches over him. He's asleep for now, but maybe they'll talk eventually." Kevin shook his head at Brian. He hasn't forgiven Rebecca in all these years. "Fool, that's what he is," Grandma Karen replied calmly. His mother didn't want to share her son with her fiancé. She told the girl she had an abortion, and he believed her. He didn't come home. He signed the contract. And at that moment, the poor girl had a miscarriage. It wasn't her fault, I'm sure. And if she hadn't signed, she wouldn't have rescued me. Brian sighed. That's how fate works. Fate agreed with Grandma Karen, and suddenly she lit up like the sun. And you, fate made you go to your friend's aid with a phone call. That's right, Bran nodded. I was on a maneuver. We took off in a helicopter and flew here. They surprised everyone there. And she laughed so hard that Mare jumped. You're going to lose your job for insubordination when you get back, her sarcastic interlocutor teased him. In response, Bran just raised an eyebrow and said, Of course, of course. Where else will they find another specialist of my level? Exactly. That was what made Rebecca decide in the blink of an eye, Grandma Karen said thoughtfully. Kevin was lucky. He was lucky, Brian agreed, glancing sideways at Grandma. Do you think I'll ever be lucky? You're at it again, Grandma Karen exclaimed, hands in the air. Brian, I'm old, and you're still making propositions. You're 8 years younger than me. You're a handsome man. You'll find a younger woman. Hey, Karen, I don't want a younger woman. Brian shook his head. I want someone to love. But why are we starting this in front of the little girl? Grandma Karen gasped, and a shocked mother watched as the old woman's eyes lit up with youth. The door opened and pale Rebecca walked in. "Is she awake?" Grandma Karen asked, looking at her face. "Yes," Rebecca whispered through tight lips. She kicked me out and covered her face with her hands. "So?" Karen stood resolutely as she shot a glance at Brian. "You take care of the girls here and I'll try to reason with this stubborn guy. It doesn't look like he's hurt." Brian hugged the crying Rebecca, and Mary, thinking about it, hugged her from behind, supporting the unfortunate woman with her whole body. Enough crying and listening. It was heard from inside the house, and everyone was startled in unison. "We haven't brought you back from the afterlife to ruin your life, and that of this girl." They didn't hear Kevin's answer, but something definitely broke inside the house. Then only incomprehensible conversations were heard, and half an hour later, satisfied Grandmother Karen came out again. "Rebecca, go inside. They need to talk," she ordered in a tone that allowed no objections. Rebecca, glancing desperately at Murray, headed towards the house. Grandma sat down in her place and winked at the girl. "Don't worry. They'll work things out. They have even more in common now than they did at the beginning. They'll surely come to an agreement." While Brian, to calm himself down and find a distraction, chopped wood behind the house, the old woman and the girl sat together, huddled together, waiting for something. Then Grandma nodded. "Ready? We can go in." She went in first and stood on the threshold, blocking the door. Then she coughed and remarked sarcastically, "You still have a lot to enjoy. You have your whole life ahead of you. Now would be a good time to have a cup of tea." Rebecca, flushed with embarrassment, moved away from Kevin, who was lying on the bed, apparently silent, but with a look of deep thought. However, his eyes followed Rebecca tenderly. As she carefully fed him tea, Mary noticed Kevin's hand caressing Rebecca's. "First aid has been given to him. Now he must be taken to the hospital," said Grandma Karen in a tone that brooked no objections. "Well, that's me." Bran was glad, but she shook her head. "I think they'll be able to manage without us there. Besides, there's a decision to be made about the girl. We've already settled that." Kevin looked at Mary and smiled. "You didn't call me Daddy in the woods for fun, did you? You won't abandon me wounded and helpless, will you?" Murray shook her head and said with difficulty, "No." Grandma Caro admired Rebecca and smiled maliciously. "Well, Rebecca, it seems you'll have to resort to your official position for once in your life. After all, you are our child rights advocate, right?" Rebecca felt and looked at Kevin with a slight challenge. "Yes, I still am. And I know exactly how to punish those who try to harm children. That's how we'll settle it then." Carwan took the lead. It seemed like giving orders was something she was used to. "Rebecca, get the jeep ready to carry our wounded brave, and you guys will take care of the girl and sort it out with the social worker. And if you don't understand the words, we and the boys will back you up," Rand laughed, glancing sideways at the commander. "I don't think that's necessary, but thanks for the offer," Rebecca replied. Rebecca didn't take her eyes off Kevin, hugging Murray. "We're ready. You still need to go to the hospital," Karen continued. "Brian, you can go back. Otherwise, they might think about deploying an army to look for the brave colonel." "They don't need an army," Brian said after some thought. "However, I have unfinished business here." And he looked meaningfully at Grandma Karen. "Don't even think about it," she exclaimed, holding her hands up. "Don't become a popular avenger. This is police business. Stay out of it." "Go on, shut up, woman," Brian said, knitting his graying eyebrows toward his nose. "They hurt a friend of mine, which means they hurt me. You think I'm going to go to the police and complain? Clearly, I'll take care of it myself." Surprisingly, Grandma Karen fell silent. "It's time for us to go," Rebecca said, looking at Mara and asking, "Are you coming with us?" The girl nodded and then gathered her courage and said, "Yes, I told you, the treatment will help." Kevin smiled. "And you, don't get brave." Grandma Karen seemed to regain her old malice. May you recover before the wedding, before theirs, or before ours." Bran intervened, and Mare was astonished to discover that the prominent witch could blush. Deciding that the adults should get together and that the only thing in her possession was what she was wearing, she launched herself to hug Leshy. The wolf licked her cheeks with his rough tongue, as if he knew that a separation was coming. Leshy said with difficulty, "The girl, don't worry, dear. You will still have time to convince us all," smiled Grandma Karen. And then they headed first along the country road, and then along the highway, with Kevin's head resting on Ma's knees. She stroked his hair, pleading with someone up there. "You are the strongest, the smartest. You already have my real parents. Leave Kevin with me. Don't take him away. I will be very, very obedient. I will help him and Rebecca in everything. Just make him recover." It seems that a little girl's talk was heard. Kevin recovered quickly, although he lost a lot of blood. But he was lucky. Help arrived in time. While he was in the hospital, Brian took care of him, while Mary lived with Rebecca. Rebecca managed Mary's affairs in a way that protected her mental health, and she did not have to deal with a hateful stepmother. Mary learned by chance that her young husband had fled from his evil aunt, who had returned without the girl and with a confusing explanation of what had happened and had filed for divorce. Apparently, she still had some conscience, unlike Aunt Amelie, who denied everything until she was shown the recording of Maria's story. Rebecca tried hard to make the punishment as severe as possible. There was no direct evidence of an attempted murder of the child, but the law punished the malicious woman where it hurt most, in the pocket, imposing a large fine. Of course, there was no question of custody, so Rebecca, in fact, using all the resources at her disposal, put forward her own candidacy with subsequent adoption. They had excellent helpers, so their application was accepted. And when Kevin was discharged from the hospital, he and Rebecca filed documents at the registry office. By that time, Maria, being a smart girl, had already understood from the conversations that Kevin and Rebecca had always loved each other. It was the intervention of Kevin's mother that separated this couple destined to be together. The woman was severely punished for her slander. When her son, affected by the alleged betrayal of his beloved, who apparently got rid of her son, joined the military service, she lost her peace and became seriously ill. At that time, Grandmother Karen, who was much younger but no less tough, tried to help her recover. It was then that the truth came to light, but it was too late. The mother died without seeing her son return from another deployment, without having gotten rid of the guilt. And only many years later, everything returned to its place. Rebecca and Kevin, barely recovered, went to visit the graves of the girl's parents. It turns out that during that time they had erected a monument in the cemetery. Even the faces in the photos seemed to look at the girl and seemed to be alive. "I love them," Maria whispered, carefully placing the flowers on the ground. "And I will always love them. Don't worry, I have Kevin and Rebecca with me now. You won't mind if I call you Mom and Dad too, right? And I also have Grandma Karen and Grandpa Brian. They also got married and quarreled right away. He called her to live with him, but she didn't move out of their house in the woods, so he moved in with her. They take him to work by helicopter, and it's okay. Who else will Leshy stay with? We'll come to see them soon, don't worry. Now I'll come to see you often and tell you everything." "Oh, you don't know. I was completely mute. But now everything is fine." Mother and father looked at the photo of their daughter and smiled. Maria looked up at the sky and also smiled at the sun, the sky, the clouds. She had always believed in fairy tales, and apparently this was her personal story with a happy ending. Or rather, just the beginning of her long and happy life.